High in the rugged wilderness, far away from Egypt's golden palaces and the cries of the enslaved Israelites, a lone shepherd tends his flock. The desert is silent, the sky burns with heat, and nothing stirs, until suddenly, something impossible appears. There, on the side of the mountain, a bush bursts into flames, yet it does not burn. The fire roars, but the branches remain whole, untouched, alive. Imagine standing there. What would you do? Run in fear, or step closer to the mystery? Moses, once a prince of Egypt now exiled into obscurity, dares to draw near. And in that moment, from within the flames, a voice calls his name. Not the voice of man, not the echo of wind, but the voice of the Eternal. Moses. Moses. This was no ordinary fire. It was the moment heaven touched earth, when God chose a humble shepherd to confront the mightiest empire of its time. The burning bush was more than a miracle, it was a declaration. That God sees oppression, that he hears the cries of the weak, and that he calls ordinary people to do extraordinary things. This story has been preserved in the Bible, in the Quran, and in the memory of generations. But why did God choose fire that does not consume? Why did he call Moses, a man who doubted himself? And most importantly, what does this mean for us today? Stay with me as we unravel the divine mystery of the burning bush, and discover how one encounter in the desert forever changed the destiny of a people. And before we step into the fire of this story, make sure to subscribe to The Sacred Path, because here, we don't just tell stories, we bring them to life. The story begins in the wilderness of Midian, a land far from the grandeur of Egypt where Moses was once raised as a prince. Years earlier, he had fled the empire after striking down an Egyptian taskmaster who had been beating a Hebrew slave. Fearful of Pharaoh's wrath, Moses exchanged the luxuries of the palace for the rugged life of a shepherd, tending the flocks of his father-in-law Jethro. Day after day, the desert shaped him, quiet, empty, and harsh. It seemed as though the dreams of his youth, the whispers of destiny, had been buried beneath the sands of exile. But destiny cannot be silenced. On one seemingly ordinary day, Moses led his flock beyond the wilderness to Mount Horeb, also called the Mountain of God. There, something unimaginable caught his eye. A bush was engulfed in roaring flames, yet the branches were not consumed. The fire was alive, radiant, and eternal, unlike any fire Moses had ever seen. His heart pounded as he turned aside to investigate, drawn by the mystery. The Bible describes this moment in the book of Exodus. The angel of the Lord appeared to him in flames of fire from within a bush. Moses saw that though the bush was on fire it did not burn up. So Moses thought, I will go over and see this strange sight, why the bush does not burn up. Similarly, the Quran also recounts this encounter. When he came to it, he was called, O Moses, indeed I am your Lord, so remove your sandals. You are in the sacred valley of Tuwa. Both scriptures affirm this as a holy moment, when heaven and earth collided in fire and voice. As Moses approached, a voice thundered from within the flames, calling his name twice, Moses, Moses. He answered, trembling, Here I am. This was not an ordinary summons. This was the Creator of all things, the one who heard the cries of the oppressed Israelites in Egypt, now calling his chosen servant. The fire was not there to destroy, but to reveal. It burned without consuming, symbolizing God's presence. Pure, eternal, and untouchable. This moment was more than an introduction. It was a declaration of holiness. The voice commanded Moses to remove his sandals, for he was standing on sacred ground. Think about that, ordinary sand became holy because God's presence had touched it. What seemed barren and empty only moments before was suddenly the most sacred place on earth. The fire was God's way of showing Moses, and all of humanity, that when he appears, even the ordinary becomes extraordinary. This first encounter set the stage for Moses' destiny. The man who once fled Egypt in fear was now being called back to face Pharaoh himself. And it all began with a fire that refused to burn out. For the Israelites, this moment was the first spark of freedom. For us today, it is a reminder that God often reveals himself in the most unexpected places, sometimes in the wilderness of our own struggles. Moses stood trembling before the fire, yet the voice from the flames did not condemn him. It called him by name. This is where the story takes a deeper turn. The same man who had once been rejected by his own people, who had lived years in exile with the guilt of his past, was now being chosen for a divine mission. And what was the mission? To stand against Pharaoh, the mightiest ruler on earth, and demand freedom for the Israelites who had been enslaved for generations. The Bible records these words, "So now, go. I am sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people the Israelites out of Egypt." The Quran echoes the same mission, where God says, "Go to Pharaoh, for he has indeed transgressed." Both accounts show the weight of this calling. This was not a task for the faint of heart, it was a direct confrontation with tyranny itself. But Moses, like many of us when faced with an impossible challenge, hesitated. He was overwhelmed by fear and self-doubt. "Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt?" he asked. In other words, why me? Why would God choose an exile, a fugitive, someone who had failed before? This is the very heart of the burning bush story. It reminds us that God does not call the perfect, he calls the willing. The bush itself was a symbol of this truth, fragile, ordinary, yet burning with the fire of God. God's answer to Moses was not a list of strategies or weapons. It was a simple promise, "I will be with you." That assurance was greater than any army or treasure. The Quran similarly records God strengthening Moses by giving him signs, like turning his staff into a serpent and making his hand shine with radiant light, to prove that he was truly sent by the Almighty. These miracles were not for Moses' pride, but to show that the power was never his. It was God's all along. Moses then raised another concern, his speech. He confessed that he was slow of tongue, fearing that his words would fail him before Pharaoh. But again, God showed patience, appointing his brother Aaron as his helper. Together, they would stand before Egypt's throne, not as trained warriors, but as messengers of the Most High. This moment at the burning bush was transformative. A man who had once lived in hiding was now commissioned to confront injustice. A shepherd was turned into a prophet. The timid became bold, not by his own strength, but by the presence of God who promised, "I will be with you." And here lies the deeper meaning for us today. How many times do we shrink from the challenges in our lives, feeling too small, too unworthy, too broken? The story of Moses reminds us that when God's fire burns within us, we are no longer defined by our weakness. Instead, we are defined by his power. As the fire burned without consuming the bush, the voice from its midst revealed more than just a mission, it revealed the very identity of God. When Moses asked, "If I go to the Israelites and say, 'The God of your fathers has sent me,' and they ask, 'What is his name? What shall I tell them?' the answer shook history. In the Bible, God replied, 'I am who I am. Tell them, I am has sent me to you.' This name was unlike any title the ancient world had known. It spoke of eternity, self-existence, and a presence that could never be confined to idols or empires. The Quran similarly emphasizes God's eternal nature, describing him as the ever-living, the sustainer of all existence. When God spoke to Moses, it was not just a private moment, it was the unveiling of a truth for all generations. The Creator of heaven and earth was not silent, not absent, but near, present, and active. The fire that burned but did not consume reflected this reality. God's presence is powerful, yet it does not destroy, it purifies, illuminates, and transforms. For Moses, this encounter was deeply personal. He had been raised in Pharaoh's court, surrounded by the worship of false gods, golden statues, and sacred animals. Yet here, in the wilderness, he encountered a God who could not be carved from stone or shaped by human hands. This was a living God, speaking directly, calling personally, and revealing his eternal name. The contrast was stark. Pharaoh claimed to be divine, but his power was fragile, dependent on armies and wealth. The voice in the fire, however, needed nothing, he simply is. The burning bush teaches us something profound about the way God reveals himself. He comes not through the grand temples of the powerful, but through a humble bush on a lonely mountain. He speaks not only to kings and priests, but to a shepherd in exile. This truth resonates through both the Bible and the Quran. God often chooses the unexpected place, the overlooked person, and the humble heart to display his glory. This revelation also prepared Moses for what lay ahead. The mission was not just about freeing slaves, it was about introducing an entire nation to the one true God. The Israelites had lived in Egypt for generations, surrounded by idols and false worship. Through Moses, God was not only breaking chains of slavery, but also chains of belief. The burning bush was the beginning of a journey to reveal to the world that there is only one God, eternal and unchanging. For us today, this part of the story is a reminder of identity. Just as Moses learned who God truly is, we too are called to see beyond the distractions of modern idols, whether wealth, power, or pride, and recognize the eternal presence that still calls to us. The fire that did not consume continues to burn across generations, reminding us that God is not distant, but near, calling us by name, and inviting us into his purpose. While Moses stood before the fire, hearing the voice of the Eternal, another drama was unfolding far from the mountain, among the Israelites in Egypt. Generations of his people had cried under the lash of Pharaoh's taskmasters, their backs scarred, their spirits crushed. To them, freedom was only a dream, buried beneath centuries of chains. It was here that the burning bush took on a greater meaning. It was not only about Moses' calling, but also about the destiny of an entire people. The Bible records God's words with striking compassion. I have indeed seen the misery of my people in Egypt. I have heard them crying out because of their slave drivers, and I am concerned about their suffering. So I have come down to rescue them. In the Quran, God's words echo the same promise, I have chosen you, O Moses. Go, you and your brother, with my signs, and do not slacken in my remembrance. Go to Pharaoh, for he has indeed transgressed. These passages show us that the God of the burning bush was not distant or indifferent, he was deeply moved by human suffering. For Moses, this was both a comfort and a burden. Comfort, because he realized he was not alone, the cries of his people had reached heaven. Burden, because he now carried the responsibility of answering that cry. Imagine the weight of that moment, an exiled shepherd tasked with confronting the most powerful empire on earth. To Moses, it felt impossible. Yet the fire that burned before him was a living symbol that with God, the impossible becomes possible. This is where the story connects so powerfully with us. Every age has its own Egypt, systems of oppression, voices that are silenced, injustices that crush the weak. And every age needs its own Moses, people who dare to step into the fire, who hear the cry of the suffering, and who are willing to stand up against pharaohs, whether they come as tyrants, corrupt systems, or even personal fears. The burning bush reminds us that God does not ignore suffering. He sees, he hears, and he calls. And when he calls, he equips. Moses doubted himself, but God gave him signs, gave him words, and gave him Aaron as support. The mission was never about Moses' strength, it was always about God's presence. For both the Bible and the Quran, this moment represents a turning point in human history. God's revelation to Moses was not just a private conversation, it was the spark that would ignite the liberation of a nation. What began in the quiet of a desert would soon shake the throne of Egypt itself. Today, the message still burns bright, we are not abandoned. The same God who appeared in the flames still sees injustice and calls ordinary people to extraordinary missions. The fire of the burning bush was not only for Moses, it was a fire meant to spread, a light that continues to challenge the darkness in every generation. As the flames continued to burn without consuming the bush, Moses' journey entered its defining moment. God gave him not just a mission but also the tools to carry it out. The Bible describes how God placed miraculous signs in Moses' hands, his staff that could turn into a serpent and back again, and his hand that could shine with divine radiance. These were not parlor tricks, they were living symbols of power, reassurance that when Moses stood before Pharaoh, he would not stand as a powerless man but as the messenger of the Almighty. The Quran expands this moment with clarity: "Throw down your staff, O Moses." And when he did, it became a moving serpent, striking fear into him until God reassured him, "Do not fear. You are safe in my presence." The same God then commanded, "Insert your hand into your cloak, and it will come out shining white without harm." These miraculous signs were more than proofs for Pharaoh, they were proofs for Moses himself. Proof that his weakness would be met with divine strength. Proof that the God who calls is the God who empowers. But even with signs, Moses hesitated. His greatest fear was not Pharaoh, it was his own inadequacy. He confessed, "I am slow of speech and tongue." The Quran records his heartfelt prayer, "My Lord, expand for me my chest, ease my task for me, and untie the knot from my tongue so that they may understand my speech." It is one of the most moving prayers in Scripture, a reminder that even the greatest prophets trembled with self-doubt. And yet, God did not reject him. Instead, he gave Moses what every leader needs: support. "Your brother Aaron," God said, "will be with you. He will be your voice." This detail teaches us that divine missions are rarely carried out alone. Even a prophet needed partnership, encouragement, and teamwork. In this, the burning bush becomes a lesson for us all: you may not feel strong enough, but God provides strength through signs, through people, through his presence. The story crescendos with one of the most radical truths ever spoken. God reveals his sacred name. To Moses' question, "Whom shall I say has sent me?" God answered, "I am who I am." This was not just a name, it was a declaration of eternal being, of unchanging presence, of a God who was, who is, and who always will be. The Quran captures this same timelessness when God says, "Indeed, I am Allah. There is no deity except me. So worship me and establish prayer for my remembrance." Here, at the end of the burning bush encounter, the call was unmistakable. Moses, the fugitive shepherd, had become Moses, the chosen messenger. From this desert fire would rise a confrontation that would shake empires, part seas, and define faith for generations. And for us today, the lesson lingers like the glow of eternal fire: when you feel small, unworthy, or afraid, remember the bush that burned but was not consumed. God's presence still ignites ordinary people to carry extraordinary missions. And just as he promised Moses, he promises us, "I will be with you." The desert is silent once more. The flames have faded, but their echo lingers. A shepherd who once ran from his past now walks with a divine mission, carrying the weight of God's command and the strength of his presence. The burning bush was not just a miracle of fire, it was the moment when an ordinary life collided with eternal purpose. And that is the message that still burns for us today. You may feel unworthy, too weak, or too broken to face the challenges before you. But the God who called Moses calls each of us in our own way, through trials, through whispers of conscience, through the struggles that shape us. His fire does not consume, it refines, transforms, and sends us out with courage. The Quran and the Bible unite in this story with a single truth, that God's presence can turn the wilderness into holy ground. And that same presence can turn your struggle into strength, your weakness into testimony, your fear into faith. As you step back from this story, ask yourself, what is the burning bush in your life? What is God calling you to do? If this story stirred something in you, don't let the flame go out. Join us on this journey through the sacred path, where the stories of prophets still speak with timeless power. Subscribe, share this with others, and stay with us as we continue unveiling the stories that shaped faith across generations. Because sometimes, all it takes is a spark to set a soul on fire.